Welcome back, everyone. My name is Austin Revel. I run 2F Tactical, a gun shop in New Prague, Minnesota. Check us out at 2F Tactical. That's the number 2, ifbyctactical.com. This is our YouTube channel going through the history of gun control in the United States. We started all the way back in 1934 with the National Firearms Act. We then covered the Gun Control Act of 1968. Now we're talking about 1986 Firearm Owners Protection Act, or the FOPA. So we're getting back in our DeLorean. We're going back to 1986. We're actually getting in that time of Marty McFly. DeLorean's just coming out. Ronald Reagan is president. Michael Jackson's Thriller is blowing up the airwaves. This is the era we find ourselves in. We're still fighting our formidable foe, the Soviet Union, and Ronald Reagan, having survived assassination attempt in his first term, is now entering his second term and moving forward with a mandate to dismantle the evil empire of the Soviet Union, as he says. And he will effectively do that in the next few years. With that being said, there came out of this time of great explosion of technology, of prosperity in the United States, and renewed sense of national pride, a bill called the Firearm Owners Protection Act. This bill was a hodgepodge mixture of both positive and negative things for firearm owners in the United States, but it did for the most part do what it purported to do, which is protect firearm owners. So where did this come from? Well, we have to go back to 1982, actually. There was a large list of abuse allegations made by the NRA against the ATF. Now, you gotta remember, the ATF was formed in 1972, took over the National Firearms Act and any gun-related control at the federal level as a sub-branch in the executive branch, if you will. They are the ones that do all the regulating, all the enforcing when it comes to gun laws. Of course, in 1968, we had the Gun Control Act, which broadened out gun control in the United States as far as importation goes, in terms of getting the amnesty for those bring-back automatic weapons, and establishing the FFL system that strictly controlled firearm proliferation in the United States, if you will, or at least when it came to buying and selling at the commercial level. Before 1968, anyone could do it. Now only federally licensed firearms dealers could do it. Well, in 1982, the Senate decided to take up a subcommittee to investigate that. And they actually came out with what we as gun nerds know. And unfortunately, still continuing and today in large part, is that 75% of the prosecutions had to do with, that the ATF had brought forward, had to do with just ordinary citizens. They weren't doing anything intentionally or weren't doing anything overtly criminal. They were just getting jammed up on a gun law here or there, and the broad explanations that the ATF had. And the Gun Control Act did do that. The Gun Control Act painted with really, really broad strokes, especially when it came to prohibited persons and all that kind of stuff. So the Firearm Owners Protection Act kind of was born out of this. And the idea was to do a couple things. It was to narrowly define the ATF's role, what they could and what they could not do. It was also to clarify what a prohibited person in the United States was. And then finally, it was to provide protections for firearm owners traveling interstate commerce, if you will. And when I say interstate commerce, I don't necessarily mean buying and selling, but if you're driving through a state, say here in Minnesota, our closest massive gun control state is Illinois. So if I'm passing through Illinois, how do I protect myself from the strict gun control laws in Illinois, right? So it did do all that for the most part. It also has the big whopper at the end, and we will get to that in a moment. So let's talk about the good things it does. And I'm going to try to be balanced here. We're going to go through both the good and bad one, or where it didn't go far enough as it pertains to these good items. Well, the first thing it did is the Safe Passage Act. Now, the Safe Passage Act inside this, it allows you to travel across states with your firearms and protects you from those strict gun control states. How does it do this? As long as your firearm is unloaded, stowed away, locked away, and not readily accessible to the driver, and you're only passing through. It's not an extended stay or anything like that. It's just a quick pass through. You're allowed in the act to stop for gas and eat and that kind of stuff. But as long as you're only doing that, you're not extending your stay in that state, you're allowed to travel with your firearm and not get jammed up on local laws. Now, how is that actually applied in today's world? Obviously, that's kind of iffy sometimes. It's not something that's been pushed greatly, unfortunately, in some states. And really, the the biggest problem with it is it's not actually clear about whether this covers air travel or not. And this is where states like New York, California, New Jersey have decided to push the envelope and have gotten away with it by saying air travel isn't covered. So if you got a layover in one of those states, they can arrest you for having something that is not legal in that state, even though you're not actually staying there and it never maybe enters your hand. It's in checked luggage. You're just passing through to connect a flight. Well, they still can arrest you because they are not applying this because it's not clear that it applies to air travel. The other thing it does, and this is probably the biggest thing, and we should look at this act as not really a standalone act. We talk about it as if it's a standalone thing. Really what it is, it's an amendment to the 68 Gun Control Act. That's really what it is. So they narrow what is a prohibited person, which is the felons that we have today. When you fill out your 48473 with someone like myself, and they ask all those prohibited questions of what it means to be a prohibited person in the United States, they are referencing the Firearm Owners Protection Act because that's where they're getting their definitions of what is a prohibited person. The other things that it does, it restricts the ATF from compiling a registry of gun owners and items that they own. Now, again, being balanced here, what does that mean? It means that they can't take any of your Title I firearms, say stuff like on the back here, wall here behind me, and compile a registry searchable to them of who has what, serial numbers, makes, models, that kind of thing. Now, this is, again, being balanced here. What it doesn't do is it doesn't make that retroactive. We're talking about moving forward. So the National Firearms Act is still in effect because they didn't make that retroactive. If they just made that retroactive period dot, well, then the National Firearms Act is defunct by point. Unfortunately, it does not do that. Now, what is the biggest thing that we hear about? And I don't really feel like we talk about the FOPA that much. I mean, those two things that we just covered are big wins to us, even though we can make the argument it didn't go far enough. That's fair, but at least we have some protection there. The big one is the Hughes Amendment, which was introduced by William Hughes of New Jersey, and that was the ban on civilian ownership of newly manufactured machine guns. We're still dealing with this to this day. What does that mean? It means that when this act went into effect, May 19th, 1986, you could no longer add to the NFA registry machine guns that were being made. The only ones that could be transferred for civilian ownership were the ones that were already on the registry on that date and before, not after that date. So what does that mean in today's world? Well, that is one of the reasons why civilian machine guns are so expensive today, starting at about $10,000. That's your entry level. You still got to do the $200 tax stamp and all that fun stuff when it comes to NFA items, but they are not readily available for the average citizen just due to their price. And it's what I would call a slow ban, a shadow ban, if you will, or whatever you want to call it. Even though you're allowed to own them, the fact is they have priced the average citizen out of them. There is a little over 720,000 machine guns in civilian ownership in the United States. So now when we come to the common use test that we can talk about when we come to like court rulings, which will be my second part of the series, when we talk about gun arguments in court, they talk about common ownership. You'll all remember the Katana lawsuit from a couple years ago that said 203,000 stun guns was common use in the United States. Well, there's 720,000 machine guns, for instance, on the NFA registry for anybody to own. We're not talking about military machine guns. We're not talking about post samples or for dealers only. We're only talking about the transferable ones. It's like 724,000 roughly, the last time I checked. So I would say that the argument is there is common use. Now, I think one of the most ironic things, we're here in 2023 right now. Joe Biden is president of the United States, and he voted in favor of this bill. He did. Now, some of the names that we know now, Dianne Feinstein, Nancy Pelosi, so they weren't in Congress at the time. But Joe Biden was, and he did vote in favor of this bill. And that, to me, is one of the most ironic things. I believe, I'm going to double check this right now. I'm fairly certain Chuck Schumer also voted in favor of this bill, but don't quote me here. Let me double check on the old intrawebs at governmenttrack.com. Let's see here, going all the way down to New York. Where is New York? All right, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York. Okay, so Schumer isn't in yet, so never mind. Take that back. He was in the House at the time, so he had not become senator yet. So I would have to double check to make sure that you know, he voted in favor before I can confidently say he did. But I believe he did actually vote in favor of this. Let's just see here. I'm in New Jersey, New York. No, he actually, I take that back. He did not vote in favor of it. But Joe Biden did. So just to put it in perspective, you know, this was actually a bipartisan act. I mean, it wasn't just a Republican-led. It was 79-15 in the Senate. So you had a bunch of Democrats coming. There was only, there was 2 Republicans that did not vote for it and 13 Democrats who didn't. There is, you know, there's 100 people in the Senate. So that, I mean, that shows you that it was wide bipartisan support, as well as 292 to like 130 in the House. So again, bipartisan support. It was widely viewed. Now, if you listen to politicians today, they decry this. You know, why can't we have a searchable database, for instance, with the ATF to make gun crimes zero? Well, the Firearm Owners Protection Act is why. Now, that also is why, like Glock selector switches, bump stocks, FRTs, these things that they're now claiming that are machine guns. Why can't you have them? Whereas, like, say, the pistol brace issue, you can just add that to the NFA. Whether it's through the $200 tax stamp or through the amnesty period that was good for May 31st of 2023. Well, that's because the Registry of New Machine Guns was cut off in May 19th, 1986. So since those things are not already on the NFA, they weren't made before May 19th, 1986, you're no longer allowed to add new ones. So therefore, you just can't have them. There is no flexibility in that. And from the ATF perspective, you know, other than redefining what a machine gun is, which is not good, and we all can agree that that should be illegal, but when it comes to like actual machine guns, like if you went out and just made one, you know, welded back a parts kit, drilled out something, all that kind of stuff, this is the reason why you can't Form 1 it. Before May 19th, 1986, if you wanted to make a machine gun, you could. You just had to do the Form 1, just like you would do an SBR, just like you would do a suppressor. Anything else, wait for that approval, pay the $200 tax stamp. Once that $200 tax stamp comes back approved, then you could make it. This is something that a lot of us are fighting for, to get the Hughes Amendment overturned. We're not even saying to get rid of the NFA, at least overturn it so we can make new ones. It would bring the cost down, make them more readily available to law-abiding citizens. But anyway, that's the Firearm Owners Protection Act. I hope that was interesting to you. Again, like, comment, subscribe. We are going to be moving on to the Brady Bill in the 90s. As you can see, we're really jumping a lot of time. There hasn't been a lot of firearm law passed at the federal level. So it's very exciting. I noticed I was going to try to keep it to 10 minutes or less, and I went a little over. We're going to continue to try to do that. My rule of thumb is if it's 15 minutes, we're going to split it to 2 videos. But anyway, we'll see you next time. I look forward to it.